Film Club.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of Film Club. I'm one of your hosts, Andy Harrison, and with me, as always, it's Andy Donaldson.
Now then.
Every week in Film Club, we invite you along to watch a film with us, and this week we're taking a look at Drunken Master.
So a very young whippersnapper that likes to be a bit of a joke. His dad is a master, owns a kind of a dojo, and he makes a fool of him. He makes a fool of him in many ways. He comes about and atones for his sins, let's say. It's Jackie Chan in one of his earlier roles. I'm going to mention something at the start, and I struggled to find a subtitled version for this movie, so I actually watched the dubbed version.
Oh,
So I know I'm gutted.
I watched a subtitled version. I would have sent it to you.
Oh, please, yeah. It did kind of partially ruin the experience because I don't know if anyone else watched the dub version, but it can be a bit Rudged at times.
Hey, has he already got your loot? Might you well forget it.
I wouldn't do that. I think I'll enjoy it.
What? I'll see you in hell.
You know, being an audio person, I really hate bad sync. So I enjoyed it, but I'd struggled at times.
I'm going to have to check out this dubbed version because the subtitled version obviously was still dubbed. You know, it was in the era of very cheap kung fu films. This is like one of those early sort of examples of kung fu comedy. It's got that slapstick sound effect, almost like at times it feels a bit Looney Tunes.
Yeah. Yes, the quality is not amazing and sometimes a bit out of sync. It's just when you have this guy that just sounds like a melt. Directed by Yuen Ping. Yeah.
This is actually Yuen Woo Ping's second film. It's very rare to get a film like this come from, I think, a second director. It was very, very cheap to make, so it kind of makes sense. His debut was a film called Snake and the Eagle's Shadow. But Drunken Master has sort of gone on to be a really influential film. I think it's got a lot of charm to it, tons of personality, and I think a lot of that personality is what drove it to become so influential. It's been iterated and it's been copied, and they've tried to take the idea of what Drunken Master is into lots of like unofficial spin-offs. Even like Yuen Woo Ping has done sort of like bits and pieces in the future where he uses characters from this, like a beggar So turns up in other films and stuff, kind of like when we were talking about Kill Bill as well. Which, funny enough, while we're on the subject of Yuen Woo Ping, I don't know if you know this, I certainly didn't until this week, that he was actually the choreographer for things like Kill Bill and the Matrix films.
Not to devalue the film, you've got to appreciate that what I'm about to say is a product of my time. It suffers the same issue we had with Heat, and that is that with Heat, we were introduced that genre. It was one of the very first introductions to kind of like that kind of style. Similar to this is the very first introduction to like a naughty kind of pupil that ends up going away and kind of, redeeming himself. And because there's so many, like the legacy down the line has introduced so many, coming back and actually seeing this and, like realizing that it's the first one. I've seen it a lot of times. I've seen the same kind of story and the same build up a lot of times before. And it's a shame, really. I would love to have seen this, when I was like 18 or something, 15, before seeing all the other multiple iterations of that came from its legacy.
For me, this was a really wonderful watch. I loved seeing Jackie Chan. I was about to say in his prime, but he kind of wasn't. This was early Jackie Chan. But regardless, the guy's still in incredible shape. He's still incredibly talented. And the choreography in this is just fantastic. It immediately put me back to when we were doing things like Police Story, and we gushed about how like Police Story and this as well. It just has such creative choreography. Like the film is desperate to get back into an action sequence, and then when the action sequence comes, it's not just like a reiteration of what's come before. It's not just someone like running away and diving over like a table or something. It's like every instance of it is just oozing creativity. You can tell it's put together by people who love stunt work. It's like, rather than how do you get up onto a table, it's how can we get you from this position up to this position in one fluid motion, or like, two maybe fluid motions. And like those things cannot be something simple. They've got to be special. They've got to be unique. They've got to be stylish. And
who better? to
it's
do
sort of, yeah, exactly. It's so much fun seeing Jackie Chan go from this guy who's like, he's a talented fighter, but he's also like got that young air about him where he doesn't want to learn to become better. He just wants to rest on his laurels a little bit. And all these people around him are pushing him to be better, like his dad, and not necessarily the right way, probably the wrong way. And then when he gets sent to go train with Begaso, and each of these training sections are him sort of like trying to get away with something. Like I love the first bit where his dad's punishing him, and he gets his friend to come along and put the ridiculous chair underneath him so he can sit down rather than like having to get his bum spiked by that thing that he's sort of like squatting over.
It's insane, that kind of and it's the next one where he's like holding that weight up with his head, and it is it's the whole thing's daft. And it's these elaborate ways of how can we make this so silly to like pull off this joke that is coming, but we're just gonna like meander around till we get to the point by adding a little bits of like as you said, choreography.
I think my favorite scene from that example is the later sequence in which he's training with Begaso, and you get this real feeling. Like I love the music at this point where he's training, and Begaso is making him sort of like hang by his legs and grab water out of the buckets with these tiny little cups and refill the big buckets. And he's asleep on the side, and we get this gorgeous landscape behind him, and you get this wonderful music, and it gives you this really calm, like character-rich environment. It reminded me a lot of like how early Western films didn't necessarily have like the most complex plots, and they might not have had the most like nuanced character work, but instead they give you this really just, it's almost a comfortable, like warm blanket atmosphere.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. And it's funny when you're saying about the choreography. What I really liked is how much especially with the style, the drunken style and the drunken gods that he has, how much of it is focused around the use of wrists. And you see, there's some of the movements, the leg movements and the way they're swaying, and gone about all these different styles I have in the first martial arts, his father's martial arts style. But the use of wrists, and there's when you said there about, excuse me, Yuen Wu Ping, who was a choreographer for Matrix. There's actually really one of my favorite scenes in the Matrix when Neil's having a fight with Agent Smith in the train station. There's a nice little fight, and he goes to punch him. Smith blocks his hand with the wrist, and he fires out his like fingers to knock him in the neck. It goes like that, and there's a lot of that kind of style, that wrist style. It gets blocked, but then he does one little action a bit more to get them. And it's just, as he said, it's creative, and it's very, how can we turn this and add a little bit more and add a little bit more? It's like there's multiple cherries on top in this in the style. I did prefer Police Story a lot more. I'm not going to lie. I think part of that, and going back to the start of this review, is my experience that I had with Dub, but also Police Stories later in his work. And Police Story starts to use the actual environment around him an awful lot more. And I'm not saying that this doesn't. This might use a chair, it might use a bit of a stool, but Police Story goes like, he's jumping up and down balconies and 2-story sort of thing.
And one I've got to mention, I think, at some point, Yoon Soo Teen, I think his name is, who plays Begaso, who's just, he's really charming. The character design obviously went on to be iconic. Conceptually, the whole gag about like, get drunk to become more powerful, in essence.
It's like Popeye, isn't it, essentially?
It really is. It really is. I love the stuff later on where like he's supposed to be like almost impressed or scared that like Jackie Chan's taking tons of like, he's drinking a load of stuff at the end, and you're like, oh my God, he's powering up.
Guys, just please watch subtitle versions, unless it's something.
Oh, yeah, definitely watch a subtitle version. One little nod we've got to do, Andy. Last time we touched on Jackie Chan, we did Police Story. This time we've done Drunken Master. Do you know what two things we've married together to create?
Lei Wulong. I did notice that.
Thank you very much. We have created
it came through.
Lei Wulong, also known as the best Tekken character.
Well, Yoshimitsu. No, 100%. But that's it. When Jackie Chan was on the floor and he was like getting up and he's doing those styles, Lei Wulong has that. I hated it when you were lying on the floor and he'd swirly kick and knock me off my balance, and it is. In the end, as he said, it's come from those two films. Really cool to see the origin of his art.
Absolutely. So there is Drunken Master. You can let us know in the comments below what you thought of Drunken Master. But Andy and I will be back once again next week, where, of course, it's time to take a look at Drunken Master 2.
And this is one I'm going to make sure I watch the right version.
So until then, get watching.